He handed me a glass of water with a smile, but I knew what he'd planned. Just yesterday, I found the life insurance policy he forged with my name on it. $1 million. My death was supposed to be his escape plan. But what he never expected was that I'd survive long enough to expose everything. He handed me the glass with a smile, but something in his eyes told me not to drink it. The sun had barely pushed through the kitchen blinds, casting pale gold stripes across the laminate countertops. It should have been an ordinary Tuesday morning. The coffee maker murmured in the background. The house smelled faintly of toast and lemon dish soap, and birds chirped faintly beyond the sliding patio door. But nothing felt safe. Dylan stood across the kitchen island holding a glass of water. His voice, when he offered it, was soft, almost too soft. "Here, Mom, you need to stay hydrated." The glass trembled slightly in his hand, just for a second. Maybe it was my eyes playing tricks. Maybe it was the insomnia, or maybe it was the paper I found tucked into a half-open drawer in the hall office the night before. $1 million life insurance policy, my name listed under insured, Dylan's name listed under beneficiary, and my signature, except I never signed it. I looked at the glass. Crystal clear water, no bubbles, no smell, no reason to say no, except for the fact that everything inside me was screaming, "Don't drink it." I smiled, just slightly, and took the glass from him. I didn't sip it, not right away. I just held it, cool against my palm, like I was testing it for temperature. But what I was really testing was trust, and it was coming up ice cold. Dylan didn't seem to notice. He turned to stir something in a saucepan on the stove, oatmeal. He was humming faintly, off-key. 6 months ago, I would have thought this was sweet. My grown son caring for me post-surgery, offering me water, making my breakfast. But now it felt like a performance, a badly rehearsed play where I already knew the ending. A mother who doesn't wake up, a policy that pays out, a son who suddenly pays off his debt. I looked at the water again. Would he really? And that's when the ache in my chest twisted, not from fear, but from something far worse, doubt. It hadn't always been like this. There was a time, when he was 5, maybe 6, when Dylan used to bring me flowers from the yard, sticky dandelions clutched in a chubby fist. Back then, I used to believe that even the worst pain could be healed with patience, with nurture, with love. But now I'm not so sure. Not after everything I gave, not after everything he took, and certainly not after the policy I found. I set the glass down, still untouched. "I'll drink it in a bit," I said. Dylan didn't turn around, just gave me a half-hearted okay, like he hadn't noticed I was shaking, or maybe he had. Maybe that was the point. As he spooned oatmeal into bowls, I studied him. 32 years old. Hair still messy like it always had been, but now it looked less boyish and more disheveled. His shoulders slouched with that same entitlement I'd seen growing like moss since his 20s, like the world owed him rest for just existing. He used to be so bright. He'd wanted to be a teacher once. I remember his college essay, helping kids believe in themselves. I paid for that college. I sold my car for that college. I worked nights cleaning offices, my knees screaming every morning, just so he could have a shot. And here we were, water, policy, a signature I never gave. "Mom," he said, suddenly looking at me, "are you okay? You're quiet." That voice, concern coated with a kind of syrupy control. I nodded, trying to smile. "I'm just tired." He nodded, then added too quickly, "Well, let me know if you need anything. You know you're safe here, right?" There it was. That word. Safe. Why did it sound like a threat? I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door behind me, and let my back slide against it until I hit the tile floor. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. Not from pain, though my hip still throbbed some days, but from betrayal. I pulled my phone out and reread the email again as if somehow it might change. Dear Ms. Whitmore, this is a courtesy notification to confirm your life insurance policy with Westbridge Financial has been activated. Should you have any questions, your listed beneficiary, Mr. Dylan Whitmore, may assist you. I called the number. Yes, I had said to the voice on the line. I don't remember authorizing this. The rep had paused. Ma'am, we have your signed documents on file. May I see them? A few minutes later, they'd arrived. It was my name, my birthday, my social security number, and a forged signature, close, but not quite right. The curl on the W in Whitmore was off. He'd practiced. But I knew. Back in the kitchen, Dylan whistled while he rinsed the dishes. I stayed in the bathroom another 10 minutes, long enough to make sure my hands didn't shake when I picked up that glass again. When I came out, I didn't go back to the table. I walked to my room, placed the glass on the windowsill, and sat down on the bed. My eyes burned. Because here's the thing no one tells you about betrayal. When it comes from a stranger, you rage. When it comes from your child, you dissolve. Your brain fights your heart in a war no one wins. I remembered rocking him during thunderstorms, singing Edelweiss when he had the flu, watching him walk across the stage at graduation and thinking every second was worth it. Now I wasn't sure I'd survive breakfast. I sat there for hours, listening, waiting, thinking, not just about the policy, but about all the signs I'd ignored. The time he borrowed my credit card and never paid it back. The time he asked me to co-sign on a business loan, then ghosted the bank. The way he'd grown colder, quicker to anger, more calculating since I moved in. How many red flags had I painted white just to keep the illusion that my son was still good? The sun had dipped low by the time I finally drank the water, hours after it had gone tepid and stale. I waited. Nothing happened. But everything had already changed. Because tomorrow, I would confront him. And this time, I wouldn't be gaslit. I wouldn't be guilted. I wouldn't let him call this love. This wasn't love. This was premeditation. And tomorrow I was going to tear the mask off my own child and find out who he really was beneath it. Before my son forged my name, he learned how to fake love first. I didn't sleep that night. The house was too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Every creak of the floorboards above made my chest tighten. I lay on the stiff guest bed Dylan had set up for me after my surgery, staring at the popcorn ceiling, remembering the nights I used to rock him to sleep during fevers, how he'd cling to me like a lifeline. Now I wondered if he was only ever clinging to the security I could offer. And somewhere in the stillness, the fog began to lift. Because betrayal doesn't just happen suddenly, it builds like water under the floorboards, silent, rotting the foundation while you're still admiring the paint on the walls. Dylan had always been clever. Even as a child, he could lie without blinking. When he was 7, I caught him sneaking cookies before dinner. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I was just checking if they were soft enough for your teeth." And I had laughed at the wit, laughed at the charm, not once wondering what he was learning about manipulation in those small victories. When his father died, suddenly, a heart attack on a business trip. Dylan was only 10. I remember the way he didn't cry at the funeral, not even once. Everyone said, he's being strong for his mom. But I knew better. Grief didn't make Dylan silent. It made him calculated. He asked about the life insurance policy the next day. Did we get money because Dad died? He said, twisting the hem of his shirt, his eyes blank. I nodded. Just enough to help us for a little while. Is there a policy on you too? The air left my lungs. Why would you ask that? He shrugged. Just wondering. I should have heard the warning bell then, but I buried it under the crushing weight of survival. Bills, groceries, tutoring, therapy we couldn't afford. I worked 60 hours a week. I missed school plays. I skipped meals. And every time he pulled away, I blamed myself. I should have been there more. I should have worked less. I should have loved better. So I overcompensated. When he turned 16 and got caught shoplifting, I believed him when he said it was a dare. When he crashed his car drunk at 19, I paid the ticket and drove him to his community service. When he dropped out of college to find himself, I sent him money for rent again and again, telling myself he'd find his way back. I excused every bad decision as a symptom of pain, a result of fatherlessness, a lost boy searching for guidance. But now I looked back and saw something I never wanted to see. He wasn't lost. He was choosing. The week I moved into his house after my hip replacement, he was the perfect son on the surface. He'd bring me tea, help me to the restroom, set alarms for my meds. He even called me mama again, like he hadn't since high school. But I see it differently now. He needed me weak. He needed me dependent. He needed me trusting. It was the long con of familial comfort, crafted with smiles and smothered in obligations. I remember sitting on the porch one night only a month ago. I'd thanked him for being there for me. I'd told him, "You've become a man your father would have been proud of." And he looked away. Now I wonder if it was guilt that made him flinch or impatience that I hadn't signed my death warrant yet. I started thinking about the small things he'd done lately. The supplements he insisted I take, pills I didn't recognize, the food he prepped for me, always plated before I could see it cooked. How he insisted I rest while he handled everything. It hadn't felt like kindness anymore. It felt like control. And the more I dug through memory, the more I realized how long I'd been blind. One morning, about 2 weeks ago, I woke up groggy, dizzy. I couldn't remember if I had taken my meds or not. Dylan said I had, that he'd given them to me with breakfast. But I couldn't remember eating breakfast. He said I was just tired. It's part of the recovery, Mom. Trust me. I wanted to. Oh God, I wanted to. Because what do you do when the one person who knows all your vulnerabilities is the one using them against you? That night, I went to the hall office, the place he kept his tax papers and old letters, and there, in a folder labeled W-2, was the policy. The one with my name, the one with the forged signature, the one that said $1 million, with Dylan Whitmore as the sole beneficiary. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just stood there, holding the paper like it was fire, and the burn hadn't hit my skin yet. That's when the plan started forming. Quiet, careful. Because when you've been a mother long enough, you learn how to survive storms, and you don't scream when the house floods. You find the highest ground. So I began documenting the pills, the food, the slurred days, the feeling that I was being softened, worn down. And I remembered something else. A few weeks back, Dylan had made me sign some medical paperwork while I was half asleep from painkillers. I hadn't read it. He'd held the pen for me. He'd said, "Just initials, Mom. I'll fill in the rest." I thought it was consent for physical therapy. But what if it wasn't? In the early morning hours, as the house finally fell silent, I stared at the closed door to his bedroom and asked myself the question no mother ever wants to ask. How long has my son been planning for me to die? And worse, how much of me is still trying to protect him anyway? You don't need poison when you've spent years teaching someone how to swallow your lies. The day I opened the drawer and found the second folder, something inside me stopped believing in coincidence. It was late morning. Dylan had stepped out for groceries, and for once I wasn't too dizzy to stand. I crept into the office again, telling myself I was only looking for his birth certificate. Just something mundane to justify the guilt churning in my gut. But I wasn't looking for proof of life anymore. I was looking for proof of intent, and I found it. Tucked inside a black envelope labeled Legal Affairs, slid beneath a stack of unpaid bills and gambling receipts, was a second policy, a new one dated just last week. Same company, same forged signature, same beneficiary, but this one had accidental death benefits. Triple payout if the death occurred unexpectedly due to a fall, injury, or unplanned overdose. I stared at that phrase for a long time. Unplanned overdose. It echoed in my ears louder than the silence of the empty house. That's when the pieces began snapping into place. fast and brutal. The way he'd encourage extra sleeping pills when I couldn't rest. The unmarked vitamin bottle he insisted I take every evening. How often I'd felt foggy, disoriented, emotionally distant these past weeks. And worst of all, the expression he wore when I asked questions. The way his eyes stayed soft but his mouth twitched, like he was already mourning me, but not from grief. I took photos of everything, every document, every signature, every date. I hid them on a burner phone I'd bought weeks ago for emergencies. A phone I'd tucked inside a decorative vase in the living room, the kind of fake plant nobody ever dusted. Because now, everything in this house felt like performance art, and I had become the main act in a death that hadn't happened yet. When Dylan came home, I was sitting at the table, pretending to do a crossword. He kissed my forehead. "You feeling okay, Mama?" I nodded. "Just tired." He gave me a sympathetic look. "You know, maybe you should go back on the sleeping pills, the new ones. You looked a little shaky yesterday." I smiled, sweet and dumb, the way he liked me. "I think I will." He beamed, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to play dead while staying alive. That night, while he was asleep, I flushed every pill he'd given me. I started pretending. That's how I survived. I slept when he told me to. I ate when he brought me meals. I felt better when he suggested new vitamins. But I wasn't healing anymore. I was hunting. I found his old laptop buried in the hall closet, the one he thought he'd thrown away after the screen cracked, but I kept it, like mothers do, and now it was mine again. With a little guesswork, I cracked his password. It was Dad 1976. He hadn't changed it in 10 years. And there, inside his email, were 3 folders that made my blood run cold. Westbridge Correspondence, Loan Sharks, Potential Timelines. Each one read like a crime novel with no ending yet written. In the insurance folder, I found his communication with a broker named Steve, a man who had no idea he was helping commit fraud. "She's not in the best health. A fall could happen any time. Let's just get the paperwork done. She trusts me completely. I'll get the signatures." And then, in the timelines folder, something even more chilling. A spreadsheet, projected payout dates, medical expense estimates, even my obituary half-written in a Word document titled momfinal.x. It described me as deeply loved and struck by a tragic medication mix-up. My mouth went dry. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it echo against the cheap drywall. That was the moment I knew. He wasn't waiting for me to die. He was preparing for it. I printed everything, made copies, gave one to a trusted neighbor named Deborah, the kind of woman who still brought banana bread over when you had a cold. I told her, "If anything happens to me, give this to the police." She didn't ask many questions. She didn't need to. She saw the bruise on my wrist that I hadn't bothered to explain. The next day, Dylan noticed the flushed pills. Or maybe he just sensed I wasn't so malleable anymore. "Did you take your sleep meds last night?" he asked, that same syrupy tone layered over steel. "I must have. I slept through the night," I lied. He looked at me for a long time. "Good," he said finally. "Wouldn't want you running yourself into the ground." That night, I locked my door with a deadbolt I had installed while he was out. I started sleeping with the burner phone under my pillow, and I kept waiting for him to slip, waiting for the next move, because I wasn't just scared anymore, I was watching. On Thursday, he asked me to sign another paper, said it was for updated emergency contact forms with his job. I said my wrist hurt. He said, "I can guide your hand again, Mama, like last time." My blood went cold. He admitted it. He admitted it, not even hiding it. I told him I'd sign it later, that I needed to rest. He shrugged, kissed my forehead, and said, "Don't worry, we've got time." We didn't. That night, I called my old friend from church, Angela. She worked at a legal aid clinic and owed me a favor. I asked her to help me look into forged documents, power of attorney, death benefits, anything that could stop this from moving forward. She agreed. We set an appointment. I would go in, alone, and finally speak the words I had buried for weeks. My son is trying to kill me. The next morning, Dylan woke me up early. He handed me a smoothie, said he made it special for me, strawberry, my favorite, but I saw the powder residue clinging to the inside of the lid. I smelled the faint bitterness beneath the sweetness, and I remembered the spreadsheet. Projected death, June 9th. Today was June 9th. I held the smoothie. I smiled. I said, "Thank you." Then I went to the bathroom, dumped it in the toilet, and called Angela. "I need to come now," I said. "He's escalating." I dressed slowly. My body still ached, but not as much as my heart. I tucked the evidence into my purse, checked the burner phone, texted Deborah. Then I opened the front door and stepped into the light, like someone waking from a coma of lies. And behind me, in that beautiful, suffocating house, my son still thought I was dying. He had no idea I was finally coming alive. There's a moment when a mother stops pleading and starts preparing. Mine came the second he smiled while I screamed. I didn't tell Dylan I was going out that morning. I just left. Angela met me at the back entrance of the Legal Aid Center, ushered me in like I was a witness in a federal case, which, truthfully, wasn't far off. I sat in her office under humming fluorescent lights, clutching a folder full of documents that proved my own child saw me as a check to be cashed. Angela flipped through the evidence slowly, her face sinking deeper with every page. Finally, she set the folder down. "You need to get out. Today. He's not just dangerous. He's deliberate." She offered me a list of safe shelters and support housing. One even came with medical care. I nodded, gripped the chair arms, breathed through the pain in my hip and the bigger pain in my chest. Angela leaned forward. "Anne, this isn't your son anymore." But that was the part she didn't understand. This was always my son. I just hadn't been ready to see it. I returned home around noon, my steps lighter than they'd been in weeks. Not because I was safe yet, but because I finally had a plan. But plans mean nothing when someone else has already written the final act. Dylan was waiting, arms crossed, phone in hand. His eyes, those same eyes that used to squint with laughter at Saturday morning cartoons, were now flat, hollow. "Where were you?" he asked, the calm in his voice colder than fury. I said nothing. He held up his phone. "You turned off your location sharing." My heart dropped. I hadn't even realized he was tracking me. I tried to step past him. He blocked me. "You go to a lawyer?" My jaw clenched. "Why are you checking my location, Dylan?" He laughed, a dry, sharp sound. "Because you're sick, you need help, and you're making bad decisions." I moved a step past again. He grabbed my wrist, not hard, but with the kind of pressure that warns. I said, "Where did you go?" I looked him in the eye, and for the first time I saw him not as my son, but as a man who had already buried me in his mind. "I went to a lawyer," I said calmly. "I know everything about the policy, about the drugs, about the forged documents, about you." He blinked. Once, then smiled. "You don't understand. I was trying to protect you." I laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "Protect me? From what? Retirement? Breathing too long?" He stepped back, rubbed his jaw. "You're spiraling. This is why I had to step in." "You mean forge my name? Write my obituary? Plan a payout like a birthday party?" The words fell between us like knives. And I watched something flicker in him. Not guilt, not shame, annoyance, like I was a stubborn client refusing to sign the deal. Then he said it, slowly, like a final chess move. "If you don't trust me, you should probably leave. Maybe it's better if you go." I froze because that was the trap. He wanted me gone, not for my safety, but because if I died after leaving, no suspicion would fall on him. No direct link, no obligation to care, just a tragic accident in someone else's jurisdiction. "I'll leave," I whispered, "but I'm taking every document with me. And if I go missing, Deborah, Angela, the police, they all know." His jaw tightened. Is that a threat? It's insurance, I said, smiling like I used to when I kissed his scraped knees and told him monsters weren't real. But now I knew better. Sometimes the monster wears your last name. I packed what I could. Clothes, ID, medication I trusted. Dylan watched me silently from the hall, arms folded like a prison guard waiting for shift change. "You'll come crawling back," he muttered. "No one takes care of you like I do." I didn't reply, because when someone shows you the sharp edges beneath their smile, you don't argue. You walk away before they cut you again. The drive to the shelter was quiet. I took back roads, changed directions twice. Every pair of headlights behind me felt like eyes. When I arrived, the intake nurse was kind, too kind. Her voice cracked when I explained why I was there. "You're not the first," she whispered. "You're just one of the few who got away in time." They gave me a clean bed, a lockbox for my things, and a private room. That night, I sat by the window and stared out at the parking lot lights. And I wept, not because I missed my son, but because I finally stopped lying to myself. The next day, Dylan sent me a text. "Hope you're safe, Mom. Let me know when you're ready to talk." I didn't respond. Instead, I called the fraud division at Westbridge Financial and filed a full report. Days passed, then a week. I got stronger, physically, mentally. I began to laugh again, soft, unsure laughter, but real. I met other women, other mothers, all with stories of betrayal wrapped in love. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. But Dylan didn't let go. He sent flowers, called from blocked numbers, left a voicemail saying, "I forgive you," like he was the one who had been wronged. Then one day, just before dusk, Angela called. "You need to come in," she said. Now. I arrived to find her holding a manila envelope. It had been delivered anonymously. Inside were photographs of me sitting on a bench, buying groceries, walking into the shelter. Time-stamped, tracked. My blood went cold. "He's watching you," she said. And that's when I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The first time my mother flinched at my touch, I learned love could be dangerous. Years later, I passed that lesson on to my son. I didn't know I was repeating my mother's mistakes until I found her diary, yellowed and brittle, buried inside a wooden chest I'd left untouched since her funeral. It was the night after Angela showed me the photos, the ones that confirmed Dylan was watching me. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts moved like blades. So I wandered into the shelter's quiet library, looking for anything to distract me from the panic. That's where I remembered the chest. Old, oak, sentimental. I'd lugged it here during my move, thinking I'd open it when I felt strong enough. Apparently, fear has a way of making you brave. I pried it open at 3:47 a.m. Inside, my mother's locket, a cracked porcelain teacup, and a stack of handwritten pages wrapped in twine. The first line read, "I was 19 when I learned that silence keeps men calm." I felt my chest tighten. Because that sentence could have been mine. The entries were dated from 1963 to 1987. She wrote about her husband, my father, the charming man who turned cruel after dark. She wrote about bruises covered with silk scarves, about neighbors who didn't want to get involved, and about the apology roses that always came with one less petal each time. But the hardest part to read was when she wrote about me. "Anne is such a good girl. Quiet, obedient. She flinches sometimes when he shouts, but she doesn't cry anymore. Maybe that means she's getting stronger." She wasn't proud. She was hopeful. Hopeful that I wouldn't break the way she did. But I did. Not in the same places, just differently. Reading her words, I realized something terrifying. I was raised to believe survival meant compliance. That safety came from making yourself small. That love required swallowing discomfort, silence, betrayal. And when Dylan began taking more and more from me, I didn't scream. I absorbed, because that's what I'd been taught. There's a twisted kind of generational inheritance that isn't money or heirlooms, it's emotional debt. I carried mine like currency, paid it to my son in the form of blind forgiveness. And he used every dollar. But the twist? The diary didn't just show what I inherited from my mother, it revealed what Dylan may have inherited from me. Because somewhere between entries about my childhood, I found one that made me gasp. I caught Anne whispering to herself in the closet. Said she was scared. Not of me, not of him, but of the things she wanted to say but couldn't. She's learning how to lie gently. I closed the diary, heart racing. Lie gently, it echoed, because that's how Dylan had learned to manipulate. Gently, not with screaming, not with threats, but with affection, smiles, carefully worded guilt, the same way I used to calm him down when his father died. When he'd cry himself to sleep and I'd say, "It's okay to hurt, but don't make others uncomfortable." What if that comfort became currency? What if I'd taught him to weaponize empathy? Back at the shelter, I found myself staring at the ceiling for hours, thinking about how many times I'd protected Dylan from pain, even when he didn't deserve it. Like the time he pushed his high school girlfriend in a moment of rage and I blamed her for escalating. Like when he stole $4,000 from my account and I told the bank it was fraud, just to keep his record clean. Like when he failed out of school and I told the family he had a nervous breakdown. Each time I handed him another piece of my dignity, wrapped in motherly compassion. And now he was cashing them all in. But there was something else now. A pit forming in my stomach, a question I hadn't let myself ask. What if Dylan was in deeper than I realized? Not just the insurance, but something worse. Angela confirmed it the next morning. She called from a secure line. Her voice was tight. "Anne, I think your son's being blackmailed." "What?" I whispered, gripping the phone. "I've been reviewing his loan documents. Some of the paperwork you copied, they're not just debt. They're tied to a criminal operation, loan sharks, underground gambling, fraud networks. He may not have just done this for greed. He might have done it to survive." My throat closed, because that meant he hadn't been planning my death out of malice alone. He may have been trying to pay off men who made threats louder than his conscience. I sat down, knees weak, because suddenly the betrayal hurt differently, not less, but differently. This wasn't just about money. It was about how far someone will go when they've lost control of their own life, and worse, how many others they'll take down to save themselves. I remembered something he said 2 months ago, late at night, after we'd watched an old movie together. "People don't just snap, Mama. They wear down." At the time, I thought it was empathy. Now I knew it was foreshadowing. I made a decision, not to forgive, but to uncover. Because now the stakes weren't just emotional, they were criminal. And if Dylan was involved with people who hurt others for profit, then the insurance policy might have been the least dangerous thing he'd done. That evening, I gave Deborah everything. Again. But this time I added a letter. To the police, to the press, to anyone who might need it if I disappeared. Because I had a feeling something bigger was coming. And it wouldn't just be Dylan knocking at my door. It's not when you stop loving them. It's when you stop protecting them that they know it's over. The envelope was thick, heavy, final. Inside it, a notarized restraining order, a cease and desist letter, a legal statement of revocation, canceling every form, every signature, every trace of power Dylan had tried to hold over my life. I stood outside the courthouse in the rain, clutching that envelope like a tombstone, because that's what it was now. Not just an ending, a burial of the illusion, of the hope, of the lie that a good mother always forgives. Angela walked beside me, quiet but steady. "You're doing the right thing," she said. I nodded. But what I wanted to say was, why does it feel like I'm killing my own child just to stay alive? I mailed the documents that afternoon, certified, tracked, final. And for the first time in months, I didn't flinch when I shut the mailbox. I stood there a long time, letting the air hit my face, letting the clouds move above me. I had done it. I had chosen me. The shelter director met me at the door that evening with a tight-lipped smile. "You got a call," she said. We didn't answer. Voicemails logged. She handed me a phone. I pressed play. Dylan's voice filled the room. So this is how it ends? You act like I'm some kind of monster, but I was just trying to get ahead. You owe me, Mom. After everything I gave up for you, everything I covered for you. If you think they'll protect you forever, you're wrong. You're making a mistake. It wasn't rage, it was desperation. And that's when I realized he wasn't angry I left. He was terrified I wouldn't come back. The next morning, the police called me. Ms. Whitmore, are you familiar with a man named Julian Decker? The name landed like ice water on my spine. Julian. That was Dylan's friend from a year ago, the one with the flashy cars and the glassy eyes. He once shook my hand with a grip that felt like threat. Yes, I whispered. Why? He was arrested in a federal raid. Loan fraud, insurance scams. Your son's name came up in the ledger. I felt the room tilt. The walls thinned. Because suddenly this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about federal prison, about charges, deals, time served, and evidence. I was no longer a pawn. I was a witness. Angela arranged for immediate relocation. A transitional housing program, upstate, discreet and secure. The staff packed my things. A volunteer offered to drive, but as I zipped my suitcase, I found something I hadn't seen in months. A letter, unopened, from Dylan. It was dated back to when I first moved in with him, before the water, before the pills, before the forged documents. I sat on the bed and opened it, hands trembling. Dear Mama, I know I've messed up, but I want to do right this time. I want to take care of you. I know I haven't earned it, but let me try. I think this is the only way I can fix it. Please, let me. I folded it slowly, because that was the trick, wasn't it? He thought fixing it meant owning me, controlling me, writing my ending like a director filming a guilt-ridden movie. But that letter, that was written by a son who still wanted approval, and that made him more dangerous than ever. Because you can't reason with someone who believes your survival is the last thread holding their life together. The ride to the new facility was quiet. The highway blurred into a dull, gray strip of distance. I watched the rearview mirror for miles, half expecting headlights to grow too close. But no one followed. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't just leave a house. I left a bond. The safe house was modest, a converted farmhouse on a quiet patch of land surrounded by trees and fences that whispered safety. The woman who ran it, Patrice, greeted me with a hug that didn't feel forced. You're not here because you're weak, she said. You're here because you survived what others didn't. I wanted to believe her, but there was still something knotted in my chest, a sense that Dylan wasn't done. That night, I lay in bed, sleepless. I stared at the ceiling again, just like I had in Dylan's house. But this time, the silence didn't feel like an ambush. It felt like a decision. The next day, the district attorney's office called. They had questions. I answered all of them, calm, measured. I turned over the policy papers, the forged signatures, the email trails, the recordings. Every last ounce of trust I had once given to my son, I gave now to justice. That same afternoon, Angela called with an update. Dylan knows, she said. He got served. The restraining order, the investigation notice, everything. What did he say? He asked if you were serious. I laughed, sharp, bitter. I was never more serious in my life. That night I wrote in a journal, not just about Dylan, but about my mother, about myself, about the silence that had shaped generations of women into shadows. And I wrote something new. The first time I said no, I felt like I'd lost him. The second time I realized he was never really mine to begin with, only the version I imagined, the one I fought to save. But I'm done saving now. I'm choosing me. It's not the moment they lose power. It's when the world stops believing their version of you that they begin to crumble. The first crack came with a whisper at Dylan's job. He'd returned to work, assuming no one knew. But people talk, and it didn't take long for word to spread, quietly at first, like a smudge on glass. A coworker saw the police at his house. A neighbor noticed a woman, me, leaving with bruises and a suitcase. And then someone found the court filing, the fraud investigation, the restraining order. The whispers turned into conversations, the conversations into suspicion, and suspicion into distance. Because nothing ruins a charming smile like a woman saying, "He tried to kill me for money." Dylan called me again. Blocked number. I didn't answer, but I played the voicemail 3 times. "They're turning on me, Mom. I'm losing my job. People are asking questions. You need to fix this." I laughed, sharp and bitter, because there it was again. Need. As if I were still his mother, still his caretaker, still his backup plan. But I wasn't. I was the voice that broke the spell. And the silence that followed was his own echo coming back empty. Angela texted me 2 days later. "He's on unpaid leave. HR launched a formal investigation." I read it twice. Then again, because there was something darkly poetic about the collapse. He'd built his life like a stage play, controlled, rehearsed, perfectly lit. But now the lights were flickering, the curtains were fraying, and the audience was leaving. I wasn't surprised when Dylan's girlfriend left. She'd been distant for months, the kind of woman who knew how to spot rot beneath polish. I remembered her once saying, "He's intense, but he loves hard." Now, that intensity had turned invasive. She moved out overnight, blocked him on everything, filed her own protective order. I watched the ripples from afar, from the safety of the shelter farmhouse. The staff kept me informed. Angela forwarded court updates. Deborah checked in with quiet strength. I didn't celebrate, but I didn't cry either, because this wasn't revenge. It was truth. Uncoiling like a snake, Dylan thought he could keep hidden in his jacket. The DA reached out again. They wanted formal testimony. My stomach twisted, but I agreed, because staying quiet would have made me complicit in every woman who never got to testify. The day of the pre-hearing, I walked into the courthouse with my cane in one hand and a copy of my mother's diary in the other. Not for evidence, for courage. Because the courtroom wasn't just a place to speak. It was a place to reclaim what had been stripped from me, sentence by sentence. Dylan was there. He looked different, thinner, unshaven, eyes ringed with shadows. And when he saw me, he didn't glare. He didn't smile. He looked small, like a boy caught stealing, realizing the consequences weren't grounding, they were permanent. He tried to talk before the hearing started. "Mom, Anne, please, let's just fix this privately. You don't need to say anything." But I looked at him the same way I used to look at his bruised report cards in elementary school. Not angry, just done. Inside, I told the truth. About the forged documents, the altered pills, the pressure, the fear, the betrayal, the breaking point. I said everything I had been trained not to say. The court reporter couldn't keep up, because once the silence broke, it flooded. After the hearing, the press got wind of the case. Local stations ran the headline, "Man accused of forging mother's signature for $1 million policy. DA confirms fraud, potential conspiracy tied to criminal network." People at Dylan's former job started unfollowing him online. Friends stopped answering his calls. Even his old college roommate, a man who once vouched for Dylan in every job interview, posted a cryptic Facebook status. Sometimes the ones who look most put together are just hiding the biggest mess. Angela warned me the backlash would grow. "He'll lash out before he lets go. Narcissists don't fall quietly." And she was right. 2 nights later, someone egged the shelter's gate. A window was cracked. A voice screamed, "Liar!" from the trees before racing off in a car. No proof, no arrest, but I knew who it was, and I wasn't afraid, because you only scream into the dark when you realize no one's listening to you anymore. I started therapy again. Real therapy, not survival talk, not surface calm, but digging, unearthing. Facing the Anne that lived before Dylan became my reason to breathe. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday. I was asked, "What do you want now that he's unraveling?" And I said, without hesitation, "I want peace without apology." Because for too long my peace was conditional, based on his moods, his needs, his choices. But now my peace was mine. Dylan's hearing was postponed twice. The DA said new evidence kept coming in. Emails from accomplices, financial logs, encrypted messages to someone named J.D. Julian Decker, the man who introduced Dylan to the loan sharks. He flipped, told everything, and now Dylan wasn't just looking at fraud. He was staring down conspiracy to commit elder abuse. A felony. Minimum 5 years. I received one last letter, handwritten, no envelope, just dropped off at the shelter. It read, "You turned the whole world against me. You told them lies. I hope you're proud." I didn't keep it. I didn't cry. I burned it. And as the flames licked the edges of his handwriting, I whispered the words my therapist gave me. I release what was never mine to carry. The first time I laughed without checking the room for danger, I knew I wasn't healing for him anymore. There was music playing in the garden, faint, a little scratchy, drifting from a rusted speaker tucked under the porch eave. Jazz, real jazz, the kind my husband used to hum while washing dishes, the kind I once danced to barefoot in the kitchen at 23. I stood beside a tomato plant, dirt on my fingers, sun on my cheek, and for the first time in what felt like decades, I didn't feel watched. No hidden cameras, no forged documents, no sun rehearsing my funeral behind my back, just wind and leaves. And a song that didn't need an audience. Patrice, who ran the farmhouse, called it ground therapy. "You've spent too long being someone's target," she said. "Let the earth remind you how to just be." So I planted things, cherry tomatoes, basil, a single stubborn row of lavender that kept dying and coming back again. It became a ritual. Each morning I woke up at dawn, made a cup of herbal tea, tied back my hair, and touched life that didn't ask me to apologize for surviving. It didn't fix everything. The flashbacks still came. Some nights I jolted awake, convinced I'd heard Dylan's voice. Other times I caught myself checking locks 3 times before I could breathe. But healing isn't clean. It's not a staircase. It's a forest, twisted, dark, and sometimes beautiful. The real change came on a Thursday morning. A group from the local church brought baked goods for the shelter residents. One of the volunteers, an older man with steady hands and crow's feet eyes, handed me a cinnamon roll and said, "Sun looks good on you." I smiled without shrinking. That was new. His name was James, a retired music teacher, widowed, thoughtful. He didn't ask for my story. He asked for my favorite poem. That night he returned with a dog-eared copy of Mary Oliver and a thermos of peach tea. We sat on the porch, didn't touch, didn't pry, just existed near one another. And when I finally told him the outline of what had happened, he didn't flinch. He didn't try to fix it or explain it away or say, "But he's still your son." He just said, "You didn't deserve it, and you don't owe anyone your life story as a warning." And then he read me poetry about wild geese, and I cried, but it wasn't from grief. It was from the stunning shock of being safe. A week passed, then 2. I started journaling again, not like before, documenting Dylan's manipulation, but documenting myself. What colors made me feel whole, what foods I ate without being coaxed, what memories I still wanted to claim. And one entry, scrawled at midnight in shaky handwriting, read, "I have value beyond what I endured. I am not a survivor. I am a beginning." Angela called during week 3. Her voice was softer than usual. "Anne, we got news." I braced, but it wasn't Dylan. It was the DA. Julian Decker, the man who pulled Dylan into the criminal web, had accepted a plea deal. His full confession implicated 4 other people in the insurance fraud ring. Dylan's name was bolded, circled, starred. "He's going to trial," she said, "and they want you to testify again." I expected fear to rise. Instead, I felt solid, like the ground beneath me was holding my weight for the first time in years. "I'll be there," I told her, "but this time not as a victim, as a mirror." Angela was quiet. Then she said, "He's going to see you shining, Anne, and it'll be the thing that burns him most." That weekend, James brought me a camera, an old Polaroid. "Why this?" I asked. "Because healing deserves proof," he said. I took photos of the garden, of Patrice laughing in her apron, of the basil finally sprouting, of myself in the mirror, hair braided, face steady. I kept them in a box labeled "Not for Him," because every photo was a refusal to be remembered only by what I'd escaped. One night, James played piano on the porch. I hadn't sung in years, not since before my hip surgery, before Dylan, before everything, but something opened in me, and I sang, low, soft, shaky at first, then strong. And the women inside came out with candles and smiles, and the sky didn't fall, and no one interrupted me. And when the last note hung in the air like an answered prayer, I felt something crack open inside me, not from pain, from release. A week before the trial, I visited my old home one last time. It had been sold, but I asked the new owners for 5 minutes. I stood in the backyard under the tree where Dylan used to swing. The tire was gone. The grass was taller. I whispered, I hope he finds his way. But I won't walk it with him. And then I left, without turning back, just when I thought I had nothing left to reckon with. His voice reminded me I still had ghosts walking in my name. It came on a Tuesday, the kind of gray-skied day where even the wind feels hesitant. I was tending to the rosemary in the herb patch when Patrice approached, hands behind her back, eyes unreadable. "There's a man here," she said. "He says he knew your husband." My heart thudded once, then again. "James?" She shook her head. "No, not James." She stepped aside, and there, standing by the fence in a battered denim jacket, hair more salt than pepper, was him. Thomas McCall, the man I thought had died 28 years ago, the man who was supposed to be Dylan's real father. I couldn't breathe, not because I was scared, but because something ancient cracked open in my chest, the kind of grief you've taught yourself to bury so deep you almost forget it had a shape. I stepped forward, every joint stiff with memory. "Tom?" I asked. He nodded, voice gravel soft. "Hey, Annie." We sat on the porch in stunned silence. James wasn't there. He was out volunteering at the soup kitchen. Maybe that was for the best. I stared at Tom's hands, the same hands that once held my waist during slow dances, the same hands that disappeared without warning after Dylan was born, the same hands I told myself were buried in a military grave in Nevada. "I thought you were dead." His mouth twisted. "That's what I wanted you to think." And just like that, the stillness of my new life shattered into shards of the life I thought I'd buried. He explained it slowly, how the military had deployed him into covert operations, how he got caught in criminal circles he couldn't escape, how he changed names, changed cities, changed his story to survive, and how, through it all, he kept tabs on us. "I sent money," he said, "through friends, quietly. I didn't want to hurt you more by showing up broken." "But you let me think you were dead." He nodded. "I thought I had to." The porch seemed smaller now. I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask every question at once. But what came out instead was, "Did you know what Dylan did to me?" Tom flinched. He looked down at his hands. "I heard bits, rumors. A guy I knew in Lansing mentioned an insurance thing, said your name came up. Did you come to help?" I asked, the words sharper than I meant them. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw it, regret. The real kind, the kind that doesn't ask for forgiveness. "No," he said. "I came to ask if I'd made him this way." The wind shifted, because that was the question, wasn't it? Was Dylan's darkness born in him, or raised in the shadows I never saw coming? "I don't know," I whispered, "but he's not who we dreamed he'd be." Tom nodded slowly. "I was broken when I left. You tried to fix me. Maybe he watched that too long." We sat for hours. He told me about the years he drifted, the jobs, the women, the guilt, how he'd nearly stepped back into our lives twice, once when Dylan was 12 and again when he was 19. "But you looked like you were holding it all together," he said. "I figured I'd just shatter it more." So he stayed gone. I didn't forgive him, not fully, but I didn't ask him to leave either, because there was something inside me, hollowed out by Dylan's betrayal, that recognized in Tom a shape I'd once loved, even if it had been made of mistakes. And then came the real shock. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket, yellowed, creased, a paternity test. "I took this years ago," he said, "after I saw Dylan at the store once. He didn't see me, but I knew I had to be sure." I took the paper, fingers numb. It said what I already knew, but seeing it in print brought back 100 moments. The way Dylan's jaw mirrored Tom's, the identical frown when disappointed, the same compulsion for control. He was his father's son, even in the ways I'd prayed he wouldn't be. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked. Tom leaned forward. "Because I want to take the stand too. At Dylan's trial." I blinked. "What?" "I'm not running anymore," he said. "And if he learned how to manipulate watching you cover for me, then I owe it to both of you to tell the truth." It was too much, too heavy. I stood and walked away, tears brimming. I didn't want redemption. I didn't need a long-lost man trying to be a father again. I didn't want another twist in a story that had already cost me so much. But I also didn't have the strength to keep hating. Not when he finally came back and asked to stand with me. Not above me, not behind me, beside me. I sat under the garden's oldest tree that night, and I wrote a letter to Dylan, not to send, but to say what I'd never been able to. "You could have been a miracle. Instead, you became a mirror I spent too long apologizing to. But I'm done now. Done protecting legacies I didn't create. Done excusing love that felt like survival." If this is the end of your story, it won't be written in my blood. The next morning, I asked Tom to stay for the trial, not for Dylan, for me, because every story needs a witness. And maybe, just maybe, mine deserved someone who had once failed, standing in the light, trying to make it right. When I looked into his eyes for the last time, I didn't see my son. I saw a storm I had finally stepped out of. The courthouse was colder than I remembered. Rows of wooden benches, pale blue walls, everything sterile, except the air, which was thick with tension, thick with truth. I sat in the front row, back straight, no cane, no shaking. Tom sat beside me, not touching, just present. And for the first time, I didn't brace myself to be alone. The trial opened with facts, evidence, paper trails, forged forms, financial records that traced Dylan's desperation like footprints in wet cement. The prosecution painted him not just as a fraud, but as a predator, calculated, strategic, cold. Each word carved a little deeper into the version of my son I used to pray for. But the image I carried, the baby I held, the boy I fed, the man I hoped would change, had already died months ago. All that remained was a stranger who had rehearsed my death like a transaction. Then came the witnesses, Angela, the shelter director, even James, who offered quiet testimony about the recovery home's role in my safety. And finally Tom. He stood steady, voice clear. He told the court about his absence, his guilt, how he'd failed me, and how that failure shaped the boy who became a manipulator. "I didn't raise him," Tom said, "but I didn't stop him either, and for that I carry my own sentence." Dylan sat expressionless, wearing the same suit he wore to weddings and funerals. When he looked at me, it wasn't pleading, it was naked. All the charm, the control, the spin, gone. What stared at me across that courtroom was a man who had finally realized the world didn't believe him anymore. And then it was my turn. I walked slowly to the stand, not because I was afraid, but because every step was a reclaiming. I took the oath, sat down, and faced the room. Then I told them everything, the pills, the papers, the voice that said, "You owe me." The moment I flushed his smoothie and knew I'd never be his again, I didn't cry, not once. Because this wasn't grief anymore, it was testimony, and testimony is truth on the record. The judge watched closely, the jury leaned forward, but Dylan, he looked away. And I knew in that moment that his silence wasn't guilt. It was the sound of a man who finally understood he would never control the ending. The verdict came after 2 days. Guilty on all charges: insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, forgery, attempted coercion. He was sentenced to 12 years, no parole for at least 8. I didn't go to the sentencing hearing. I didn't need to. I'd already walked out of that courtroom with everything I needed. My life, my voice, my name. Unattached to his damage, weeks passed, then months. Spring arrived, the lavender finally bloomed, and I published my first essay. Title, Love Isn't Life Insurance, The Cost of Loving Someone Who'd Rather Bury You Than Change. It went viral. Readers reached out. Survivors, mothers, estranged daughters, sons who had turned away from the darkness their fathers passed down. One message read, "Your story saved me from dying quietly." Another, "I canceled my policy. Thank you for reminding me that peace isn't betrayal." I started hosting writing circles at the recovery house, taught women how to hold pens the way they'd once held breath, tight, afraid, invisible. And we wrote ourselves whole. One evening, James took me on a surprise drive. We ended up at a small plot of land outside Traverse City. A garden had been started, a bench built, a sign staked in soft dirt. Anne's place, where roots heal and stories begin. I cried then, because this was a life not built from survival, but from legacy. Not a legacy of guilt, not of Dylan, not of pain, but of presence. Of what happens when you stop bleeding for others and start growing for yourself. I haven't heard from Dylan. I don't expect to, but I know, wherever he is, he's no longer writing my story, because the final image I leave behind isn't in a courtroom. It's not a signature on a policy. It's not even a bruised woman on the floor of her son's home. It's me in sunlight, digging, laughing, reading poetry aloud while basil grows wild behind me. And when someone asks me if I ever think of him, I say, only as a chapter, not as the ending, and never again as the author. If this story made your chest tighten or your silence feel seen, don't scroll, share it, because someone out there is still drinking the water, thinking it's love.